Made with the support of NZ On Air.
Here today, it's pretty wet.
Bear with us. For this episode, we're starting with something completely different.
It is what it is. We're out here getting ready, putting the polish on a good week. Looking forward to England tomorrow.
For those who guessed, yes, that was All Black Brodie Retallick, speaking in Japan during the Rugby World Cup in 2019. And what's he got to do with the COVID pandemic? Well, nothing. Okay, he probably does have a COVID story because, let's face it, nearly everyone on the planet does in one way or another. But that's not why we're playing a clip from him. It's just because it helps us introduce you to someone we're going to talk about in this episode. So does this clip.
In a way, we've come to the ends of the earth. It's only a little bit more over a century that people were pushing across the Antarctic on land and exploring it.
Yeah, again, wildly unrelated to COVID, except for one thing. And that is where we saw these clips of Brodie Retallick and a doco about Antarctic oceanic explorers.
To reach into the ocean depths.
Back in 2019, they are the kinds of things that are being posted by a man on his Facebook page. We're not going to use his name for reasons which will become apparent. Suffice to say, the Facebook page in question belongs to a retired man we're going to call John. He's well known and well liked in his community. A man who enjoys sharing an eclectic mix of stuff, from Antarctic exploration to music. Here's another wholesome video, a performance of the famous American fiddle tune Orange Blossom Special by the Klezmer Company Jazz Orchestra from 2010. And of course, John loved rugby. In fact, through rugby, I know people who know him. I suspect my dad, who died many years ago, might have met John. Anyway, the people who cross paths with him in his day-to-day life seem to have nothing but nice things to say about him. So far, so normal. But then, COVID comes along. And remember back in episode 4, we mentioned people like Billy Takahika Jr., who were suddenly doing their own research. Well, John was doing that too. And so his social media started to change. Not so many rugby posts or videos of concerts. A few weeks into lockdown, he's posting things like, direct sunlight found to eliminate COVID-19. Now, I've just read that out, so you probably couldn't tell, but that was all caps. It was the headline on a post which, to be fair, extensively quotes from someone who you'd normally think would be a source of quality information, the President of the United States.
You know, a lot of people think that goes away in April with the heat.
I think that's a problem that's going to go away.
When you have 15 people, and the 15 within a couple of days is going to be down to close to zero, it's going to disappear. One day it's like a miracle. It will disappear.
You have to be calm. It'll go away.
It will go away. Just stay calm. You know it is going away. It's going to go away, hopefully at the end of the month, and if not, it hopefully will be soon after that.
John was listening to Trump and encouraging others to as well, but he was also starting to veer down some other paths. Vaccine development, he said, was being pushed by the World Health Organization for some agenda or other, and Bill Gates was going to provide a tracking, spying tool for governments by inserting a nanochip in the vaccines. These posts are from the very early days of the lockdown, so at this point, John is occupying a fringe within a fringe, within Aotearoa at least. But he keeps posting. If you look at his Facebook now, some of the links are dead, like the one pointing to a YouTube video of Plandemic, a so-called documentary that was eventually pulled because it breached YouTube's rules, which is really a euphemism for it promoted crazy conspiracy theories. Some of John's posts at this time attract comments from his friends who say things like, "Don't listen to lies." But he does, and he keeps listening to them, finding videos and posting.
Pandemic
and posting.
Is a Trojan horse.
Liars in lab coats.
And
That's
posting.
the focus. We must have a more balanced and realistic
calling
assessment of our situation.
It's not good for you and me, for the ordinary
For
people.
much of the past year, the medical media cartel has been guilty of...
Sovereignty of the individual and of nations and families and workplaces doesn't really play into their almost...
But they're still used by left-wing politicians, invariably the Green or...
They're coming for you, your family, your job, your savings, your home, your pension, your culture, your traditions, your freedom.
Anthony Fauci was a primary offender, including
Around with a mask.
These bodies are set up. I think the credibility
The
of many of
signage,
them
the
has been
arrows, the
shredded.
one-way systems, walk, don't walk, the yellow notices on every flat surface, the sanitisation, the masks, all the paraphernalia of this neural.
It's time to say no to the
Normalcy,
pseudoscience
don't worry,
masquerading
it's right
as
around.
serious. Liars in lab coats are still liars, and that's the angle.
Until
In New Zealand, I can tell you that a large number of Italian troops are present. There are going to be explosions, shooting, and children screaming.
we'll come back to John.
The year is 2020 and a deadly pandemic is raging all across the globe. We are locked inside, we are terrified, we are baking sourdough. We've been living on Zoom in our living room since the lockdown was declared. Societies are bended, our commitments are suspended, it's all unprecedented and nobody's prepared for a quarantine nation. Conspiracy theories and online trolls. It's a quarantine nation. Relatives disappearing down rabbit holes. In the quarantine nation. Misinformation, confusion and fear. In the quarantine nation, lockdowns and vaccinations are shaking the foundations of our quarantine nation. Oh yeah.
I'm Adam Dudding.
I'm Eugene Bingham. And thanks, Jack. Ngā mihi, you're right. We're in the midst of Quarantine Nation, an 8-part, mostly serious history of New Zealand's pandemic years, produced for Stuff by Te Pūrongo Productions. Episode 6, Culture Wars.
COVID-19 is caused by a virus, SARS-CoV-2. So, at its heart, dealing with the pandemic is all about health, right? And yet, as we all experienced, not quite. There's a bit more to it than that. Pretty early on in 2020, there's a contest of ideas. Of course, that's a good thing. As Juliet Gerard, Jacinda Ardern's chief science advisor, noted back in episode 3, within the science community, she welcomed debate.
And as a scientist, I was almost concerned that there was too much consensus, and that's normal around a short, sharp crisis. But there's a big question of how long that consensus can hold and should hold, because you need that healthy swirl and debate of ideas.
But soon the debate turned nasty, in some circles at least. COVID became a battleground not just in terms of scientific debate, but in terms of politics and ideology too. Who's right and who's wrong, villains and angels. And in that sometimes ugly contest, there were two countries that were often pitted against each other, their contrasting approaches seized on by some news shows and podcast hosts.
The American left and their media poodles have long held up New Zealand as the model for how to properly deal with a lot of things, including COVID. But anyone who loves freedom should take note, because the Kiwis have a terrifying new response to rising COVID case numbers. They're throwing people into quarantine camps.
Those two countries were, of course, New Zealand and...
Sweden has a slightly larger population than the state of Michigan, and just like Michigan, it's a mix of larger cities and smaller towns. Sweden has never, unlike Governor Whitmer and so many American states, adopted the Chinese model, the authoritarian model, in order to contain coronavirus. Yet so far, Sweden has fewer cases of coronavirus and fewer deaths than the state of Michigan does. Huh. Does the governor of Michigan know this? Does she care? No. That suggests it's about science, but it's not, and you know that by now. It's about power.
Of course, it was never simply about New Zealand or Sweden either. It was more that the idea of what these two countries represented was being weaponised. New Zealand, headed by Jacinda Ardern, at that point the darling of the world's liberal left, versus Sweden. Not always a country held up by right-wing commentators, but they're making an exception right now because that light-touch, zero-lockdown approach is quite appealing to the libertarian right. And sometimes, New Zealand scientists like Michael Baker get dragged into the middle of it all.
Well, The comparison between New Zealand and Sweden became very real for me in April 2020 when I was interviewed on Good Morning Britain with Piers Morgan.
Let's start with New Zealand. Professor Michael Baker.
And they had 4 of us lined up there, and there was me from New Zealand, and then there was Johan Giesecke from Sweden. And I know Johan very well because I actually did a sabbatical with him 5 years earlier. And, a charming man and very smart. And we were being set up in exactly that comparison. I think the good news was that Piers Morgan obviously has a soft spot for New Zealand.
And New Zealand obviously has the benefit of being an island, but you did shut down the border pretty quickly. We still have an
And he was very nice to me. But then he gave Johan a real grilling about the Swedish approach, which I thought was a bit excessive. But you're right, that we were being set up as, I guess, contrasting approaches for managing the same threat.
Sean Hendy was also taking an interest in the Swedish approach.
If I was to characterise the difference between New Zealand, we're going to take very short, sharp measures and then try and get back to normal with closed borders. Sweden was going to keep measures in place for a very long time. So what would those measures look like? Both approaches are actually not unreasonable approaches. I would say there are some advantages to New Zealand's approach, but first is you've always got the option of taking the Swedish approach later, whereas the Swedes, you kind of lose the option to do what New Zealand did.
So my name is Anders Tegner. I work at the Public Health Agency of Sweden. During the pandemic, I was the state epidemiologist of Sweden, the spokesperson for the Public Health Agency, and the head of our Department for Data Analytics.
So yes, this is Anders Tegner, who became the figurehead of the Swedish response. We were interested in his views about the way Sweden became some sort of symbol of the laissez-faire, let-it-rip approach, for better or for worse.
You have the political right in somewhere like America saying, look at Anders would be doing this, he's awesome. And then people on the left are saying, this guy's a monster and he's trying to get us all to do the Swedish horror story.
Yeah, no, that was fascinating. I don't think we really realized to what extent that happened until a little bit afterwards. So afterwards, I've been in contact with US colleagues and I've been also to Stanford at the meeting and so on. And then I realized that it's really strange because this was not a laissez-faire political kind of thing at all. This was a practical approach to trying to deal with something as effectively as we could, thinking about public health as a whole. And it did have nothing to do with politics and definitely not with the far right laissez-faire politics. If anything, people in Sweden will probably say you're more on the other side. The political establishment in Sweden did not really get involved very much, but if anybody was critical about what we did, it was the far-right parties in Sweden. They were not so much in agreement with what we did, while the Social Democrats on the other side were much behind us.
Where would you place yourself on the political spectrum? Are you left-leaning? Are you right-leaning?
I mean, as a public servant in Sweden, I'm not leaning.
Mm-hmm. Nice.
I followed the instructions from our political people, but also taking into account what the law says that we should work with, and that's very much health equity. I mean, trying to deliver good health to everybody in our population with a real focus on the ones that has the most difficult time. So that's very much what we do.
Like many countries, Tegnell says, Sweden's initial thinking was guided by its existing national pandemic plan, which had been designed with influenza-like illnesses in mind. The primary goal was to flatten the curve. But unlike New Zealand, Sweden did not have the luxury of reconsidering that strategy because COVID had already arrived there big time, thanks to the timing of Swedish winter school holidays when many people went skiing in Italy or Austria.
The thing is that you need to remember is that the introduction in Sweden was massive. And I think that to a great extent decided how things played out during the first wave in the spring of 2020. And the reason was that during those weeks in March when everything happened, 1 million, 10% of the Swedish population is traveling in other countries.
Okay.
For a week and then coming back. And a lot of them came back with COVID-19.
So you had a big and fast incursion.
Yeah. So what happened very, very quickly is that we had to leave the concept of trying to stop it at our borders, which we tried to do for a few weeks' time. Worked reasonably well. But when so many people came back at the same time and with a disease that was not very obvious, our health system was very quickly in a position when they had to decide, do we keep on testing and contact tracing, or do we treat the patients? And of course, that decision was very easy. So we went into mitigation and trying to flatten the curve in the country as much as possible.
The decision was made to place responsibility on individuals and to gain public consensus and support.
We understood that this needs to be done on the individual level. You can never really get good laws and regulations in place that will stop it completely because everybody's different.
Public health measures included asking people to meet each other less, advising people to work from home, and instructing people to isolate at home if they felt sick. And financial assistance was provided to incentivise them to do so. And there were, in fact, some restrictions.
We closed down big gatherings like everybody did. We had regulations for restaurants and public places like that, which meant that they could only have so many people in their establishment at one time.
Looking back, Anders Tegnell accepts that there were successes and failures to Sweden's approach.
I think the success was that now when we look at excess mortality, which, I mean, it's very difficult to measure mortality during a crisis like this because we do things very, very differently, so numbers are not really comparable. But excess mortality is, and we can see that Sweden did very well over the whole period. We had fairly high, but not much higher than many other countries during the first spring. But after that, we had much lower than most other countries. So in the end, we end up being one of the European countries with the lowest excess mortality. So I think that was the success. The other success was that we managed to keep the society a little bit open, which made people feel much better and the mental health and so on deteriorated less than many other countries. Especially, very importantly, we kept the schools open. And that was incredibly important for the kids. The negative side was our long-term care facilities did not work very well. Our big migrant group with newcomers to Sweden also suffered much more than people who have lived in Sweden for a long time.
As much as we don't want to get too caught up in the comparison game, it's only natural to wonder, right? So, of course, we asked some of the New Zealand scientists we spoke with about how the two countries compared. Here's Susie Wiles.
The evidence is really clear that an elimination response was the best, both health and economic response. So we didn't lose as many people as them. We had a better economic response. And I think the thing that people forget is that while we had these really strict lockdowns, we didn't actually have them that much. And I know, and I was in Auckland, so I know we had more than most of the country. But there's this thing called the Oxford Stringency Index. So there were researchers who were tracking basically how stringent each country's restrictions were, health measures were. So you can see essentially when did people have their lockdowns and how strict were their lockdowns. And so our lockdowns are one of the strictest in the world, but we spent less time under restrictions.
And Sean Hendy.
In the overall scheme, the outcomes weren't hugely different. My estimates are that our response cost us less because we had short, sharp lockdowns, whereas the Swedes basically had to... The things they did weren't as dramatic as what we did, but they had to leave them in place the entire pandemic.
And so these are things like they weren't lockdowns, but they did have limits on sizes of crowds and such.
You couldn't drink after 8 p.m. or whatever it was. So there are all sorts of things that happen. And then, of course, their schools, even though they didn't close their schools, the schools were closed for longer than ours because teachers were sick. And so there weren't the teaching staff. So actually Swedish kids had more disruption in their schooling than kids in New Zealand did on average because of that approach, but not dramatically different.
You're a maths guy, but people in the end don't really fully add, they do the sums they want. Can you imagine there's a time in the future where someone can say, yes, Sweden was right, no, New Zealand was wrong, or vice versa? Or are we just going to have to accept that these bloody arguments are just going to...
I think it's too close to call in a way. I mean, if the virus Okay, the one thing I think is that you could put a strong case up for is if the virus hadn't evolved, if we hadn't seen those variants, New Zealand would have come out streets ahead. So the fact that both countries were dealing with these variants meant that we ended up there or thereabouts. You'd still rather be New Zealand, right? I think that it's still clear, but the margin isn't as different. Had the virus not as evolved as quickly as it did, so that New Zealand wasn't facing Delta in 2021, I think he would have preferred our approach.
Actually, we asked Anders Tegnell that in a roundabout way. Did he have any thoughts on the New Zealand approach?
You really need to know the context very well to make good decisions. And I think that's something that and also when I discussed with my colleagues, that we all realized that all countries are very different, and also in ways that we don't really think about. And we found differences between our Nordic countries that we hadn't even thought about before. And that made a huge difference to how the pandemic played out in our countries. So it's quite difficult. I would definitely think that trying to keep it outside of the country for as long as possible would definitely be very high on the agenda.
So all that time you buys you a lot more options.
By time, I think, since it's reasonably possible and not very costly in a country like New Zealand, so I think that would be high on the agenda.
Reasonably logically, if you were dealt the same hand as New Zealand, you may well have made similar decisions, but you need to know all the context to be sure. Were there countries that you looked around and thought, oh, for goodness sake, you should just be more like us, you should be more Swedish, we're getting it right?
I think we were so focused on trying to find out what is the best to do in our context, with it, as you said, with the cards we have dealt for us, and that we did not really go into thinking about that somebody else should do what we are doing, because I think we were very much focused on you need to do what is best for you in your context with your epidemiological situation.
A day after speaking with Anders, we had our interview with Ashley Bloomfield, and when we spoke with him about Sweden, honestly, it was difficult to separate these two senior health officials' comments.
The thing that really stuck in my mind, and it's still there, was the comment by Mike Ryan from the WHO. He made this comment quite early on, and he said, choose your path and go down that path with no regrets. And we chose our path, and Sweden chose theirs, and I don't judge, and I hope people don't judge us for taking the path that we took. Each country took decisions based on what was possible from a societal, a political perspective, and taking into account what they thought was the right thing to do at the time. And there are many similarities between New Zealand and Sweden, but there are also quite important differences. For our part, the approach we took, the elimination strategy, worked for us, I think. And for Sweden's part, I think they did a good job. But it wasn't just one decision early on. I can imagine they were working just as hard to implement their strategy as we were to implement ours.
You might be interested to know that he said almost exactly the same thing you just said. Just given the culture wars that have been constructed around Sweden and New Zealand, I thought that was really interesting. It's like, oh, okay.
Yeah, there wasn't a right or a wrong response. The important thing for me was to have really good decision-making processes, and that's what we did, and I'm sure Sweden did as well.
You know what is going on.
Liars in lab coats.
It's going to disappear one day.
Anthony Fauci was a primary offender.
There are going to be explosions, shooting, children screaming.
So what is a vaccine? So a vaccine is really just taking advantage of something that our bodies do, which is that basically when we see a foreign invader, we basically learn to recognize it so that if we see it again, we can respond much more rapidly to it.
This is Dr. Susie Wiles again. We'd asked her to give us a Vaccine 101 because it's time we return to the timeline we've sort of been trying to keep to with this podcast. At the end of the last episode, we were up to about August 2020. During that golden post-lockdown period where New Zealand was going to sports games and music gigs and feeling maybe a little too confident. As the rest of 2020 played out, we became more and more focused on vaccination.
So the idea behind vaccination is that you just bypass the whole seeing it in the first place. So you essentially what happens in the lab is scientists try to understand what is it about the organism that our body recognizes. So what is it, can we replicate that so that our body, and then we show it to our body in a safe environment. So instead of giving it the virus or the bacteria with all of its other bits and pieces, we just say, here's the little bit that your body will recognize, relying on our body then to make antibodies and to basically store the knowledge of those antibodies away. And so that it will then, when it sees the real deal, it rapidly springs to action and goes, right, yep, no, I know about this, I've seen this before, and starts to respond in an appropriate way. So vaccines are super cool.
Easy, right? Well, at least in theory, eh? So we've already explained how almost from the get-go, scientists around the world had been figuring out how to come up with a vaccine to vanquish COVID-19. Vaccines, especially for a country like New Zealand, where at this point there's zero opportunity to develop immunity by, catching the disease, are critical. Vaccines are going to be our way out of this mess. And there was an enormous advantage at hand.
The thing that was different this time around, I guess, was that we used a completely new way of delivering that information about what we wanted the body to see.
Most traditional vaccines would rely on deploying bits from an actual virus or bacteria to do the job.
What happened with these new vaccines was, instead of delivering the whole virus or delivering the particular protein, we delivered the genetic information to get our cells to make the protein itself. And the advantage of this technology is that it means you can make new vaccines very quickly.
To make a vaccine, you don't actually need the organism itself. You don't need the virus. You just need the genome.
This is Dr. Helen Pertussis-Harris. We've heard her voice a few times, but how about a proper intro?
I work at the University of Auckland as an associate professor, and I have been involved in vaccines and vaccination for closer to 30 years than I like to think.
She's been on global bodies like
the WHO Global Advisory Committee for Vaccine Safety
and
co-director of the Global Vaccine Data Network.
So yeah, Helen was following developments very closely as soon as COVID emerged.
In the very early stages, there was daily updates. So I was plugged into that initially.
And minds quickly turned to these new vaccine possibilities.
The genome of the virus was uploaded to the public domain, I think the 10th of January. On that day that was uploaded was when the development of vaccines began.
And this new technology the world was focusing on was...
Well, mRNA, M stands for messenger, and it's really the template for making a protein of interest.
Actually, it wasn't new as such. The idea had been around for a few decades.
There'd been a lot of research that had been done, for example, in laboratory animals and then later in human trials. And I think perhaps the most relevant were that there were examples of mRNA vaccines for MERS, the Middle Eastern coronavirus, and also SARS, that had demonstrated the ability to be able to invoke these useful immune responses.
With the genome published, and to be clear, the thing we call the genome is pure data, literally 30,000 or so characters of the 4-letter RNA alphabet, which, if you typed up on A4, would take only 10 pages or so. So once that really tiny file has been shared around the planet and looked at closely, vaccine scientists recognise there are parts of the virus that are perfect candidates to look at as the basis for a vaccine.
It's got the sticky out bits on the outside, the spike protein. What the spike does is it's like a key that it connects with an antigen on the cell surface. If you can block it, it can't get into the cell.
The idea behind the mRNA vaccine is that it instructs cells near the injection site in your body to actually make some spike protein for itself, which is pretty much harmless on its own. But then your body's immune system sees that protein and develops its own antibodies in response. So when an actual COVID virus comes along with its actual spike protein, your body is ready to bind to the spikes and stop them from doing their job.
So those are the tricks, basically.
We've all seen those close-up images of the coronavirus with those spikes all over it, sticking out like hedgehog spines.
You can imagine antibodies, or lots of antibodies, binding to these little spikes on the virus. It actually essentially neutralises it.
Take the keys off them.
Take the keys off it, yeah, it essentially. because it is like a lock and key.
That sounds like the tricky bit, but to Helen, right from the get-go,
I was actually quite confident about the science and not about anything else.
Right.
I thought nothing else is remotely ready.
Why not?
I couldn't see a way that there would be the cooperation and collaboration within countries and between countries and agencies. I mean, the logistics are huge.
So that was something was concerning you even before COVID rolled out?
Yeah, because I've spent years complaining about it. So I thought this is really going to be a challenge. I knew, for example, New Zealand was in no fit state to deploy a vaccine at scale at the time or deal with mass infections. Public health had become so eroded.
Helen's not just saying this in hindsight either. Here she is talking to us on the Coronavirus NZ podcast back in July 2020. Are we prepared?
No, we're not prepared at the moment. But thoughts have now moved to getting prepared, which is very pleasing to see.
And she got quite specific too. There was the National Immunisation Register.
It's very elderly and would not be able to cope with something like this.
There was cold storage.
Keeping the vaccine at the right temperature. So that has to be controlled all the way throughout the transportation.
The list went on, but somehow, like other aspects of the response, challenges were overcome. People swung into action. And in October 2020, New Zealand signed an agreement with vaccine manufacturer Pfizer. And in February 2021, the rollout began. It wasn't perfect. It was a lot later than some countries did theirs. And there were issues. But looking back now, Helen says that despite her pessimism when we talked back in 2020...
Given the overall timing of everything, I think we did pretty well. When you actually look at the timeline, could we have got it any faster? Well, hell, it was only announced in December and we were vaccinating the first people in February. That's pretty quick.
Where she believes New Zealand didn't do well was in communication, helping people understand what the vaccine could and couldn't do.
Trying to convey the risks, the benefits, and that it's not a silver bullet, and the fact that reducing something bad by a lot is not the same as completely getting rid of it. But also early on, the vaccine prevented infection. Now, if you prevent infection, then you can have a really huge impact on the transmission of the thing. Now, of course, as time went on, the immunity waned. People who'd been naturally infected, that immunity waned. People who'd been vaccinated, the immunity waned. But that seemed to be a really hard message to get across.
So too did messages about vaccine safety.
No vaccine is 100% effective or 100% safe. I would call the Pfizer mRNA vaccine is an extremely safe vaccine. And we now have well-established risks for certain serious events. Of course, the one we will talk about, which is myocarditis. So the risk of that per million doses is in the order of sort of 10. So it depends on the age. We have a figure from New Zealand that's about 3, but it's going to be a higher risk for example, younger males, as we know.
This stuff can be really serious. There would eventually be a case in New Zealand where a young man did die of myocarditis caused by getting a COVID vaccine. A 26-year-old Dunedin plumber called Rory Nairn, who died in November 2021, 12 days after getting the vaccine. The coroner's inquest found that he hadn't been warned about the risk of myocarditis and that potentially if he'd known, he could have received early treatment when the symptoms started. So yeah, a tragedy and a horrible irony that a potentially life-saving treatment can cause someone's death. But the thing is, COVID causes myocarditis too, and at vastly greater rates than the vaccine does.
The difference between getting myocarditis from the vaccine and myocarditis from having the infection is orders of magnitude difference, about 450. And if you're a young male, about 880 or so per million cases of COVID for myocarditis. So it's a huge difference.
These sort of issues are known and monitored closely with any vaccine rollout. And Helen says that was done well with the COVID vaccines. But
what we really need to do better is our communication. And over the time that we had during 2020, I think it's pretty well globally accepted New Zealand was nailing it. and then we needed to pivot. We needed to change the way we communicate. And I think that we didn't. And I think that has perhaps contributed to a loss of trust.
A loss of trust. Helen's right. There was a loss of trust. It didn't come from nowhere, and it wasn't just about vaccines. By late 2021, things were fraying in all sorts of ways. And we'll dig into that a little deeper in the next episode. But remember at the top we told you about John, not his real name, the retiree who liked rugby and Antarctic sea life and concerts, who then kind of got into doing his own research and posting things to his Facebook page. As 2021 marched on, John's posts became more and more extreme. One post, again in full caps, read, "The world's greatest scam continues. This quote-unquote virus, which is nothing more than a bad flu, has a 99.7% recovery rate, yet the maniacs in the beehive persist with the lie." He was convinced COVID was fake and speculated that various plots to take over or influence the world were behind it. He even shared a video from a site which claimed military action was underway to save the world.
Militaries are turning against their elected governments, if their elected governments are satanic, deep state, cabal, and just anti the people. And in some cases it's becoming a bit more obvious, but in most cases it's covert. And it's true that in some cases the bad guys have used the lockdown for the COVID to literally do bad things.
And yes, the video claimed, New Zealand was one of the countries where the pushback was coming, courtesy of some troops from very far away.
Sometimes we have to be very careful that what's happening is not the deep state. It's actually the good guys operating. And so in New Zealand, I can tell you that a large number of Italian troops are present, and our own members in that country have actually had regular soldiers come to their door and tell them that there are going to be explosions, shooting, and children screaming. And they mustn't come out of their door. And they were given a date. I'm not going to give you that date.
Let's be clear, there were no Italian troops, no explosions, and no satanic deep state cabal. However, so many people around the world were finding something very seductive about this type of content, and it was convincing people like John, that some great conspiracy was underway and COVID was part of it. A few weeks after sharing that video about the troops, John caught COVID himself. Although he was reasonably fit and healthy for his age, it really hit him. Not long afterwards, critically ill with the virus he had denied even existed, John died. These sorts of things happened all around the world, anti-vaxxers getting sick and dying, some of them while pleading for the vaccine. New Zealand nurse Jenny McGee saw it when she was working in intensive care in the Caribbean. She worked some contracts there while taking some time away from the stress of London.
People coming in who said, "Oh, give me the vaccine now," and they were basically on their deathbed. So definitely saw that a bit out there. But yep, there was definitely stories from people who had looked after patients who were begging for the vaccine at that point, but it was too late.
It was tragic. No matter what had been done and what had been said in the weeks and months preceding, every death was, of course, still deeply painful to family and to friends. Which made what happened after John died even worse. And this is the reason we're not using his full name or otherwise identifying him. After his death, his social media feed became a culture war battleground itself. There were hundreds of comments. Some from people denying John had even died of COVID, some from people rejoicing that an anti-vaxxer had died, like it served him right. And then those two opposing groups taking pot shots at each other in the comments of a dead man's Facebook page. It was horrible. No one deserved that. John didn't deserve it in death. His family didn't deserve it in their grief. How did we become that?
I'm working on a podcast about the COVID pandemic, and I just wondered if I could have a chat to you, or ask you if we can talk to you about your friend.
This is from a phone call I had with one of John's old friends.
As I mentioned, one of the aspects that we're looking at is that the mantra right at the start was be kind, and that seemed to work for a while, but then it seems we became quite the opposite. And I think that's reflected in some of the comments that were posted after passing on his Facebook, where people were triumphant. It was crazy.
This friend, they understood where we were coming from. They'd seen the pain those comments, that culture war, had caused.
And I've seen on Facebook page, which I hope you don't mind that I've looked at, some comments that you made, sort of, I guess, trying to encourage people to stop being mean and unkind and unthoughtful.
The friend initially said they'd be happy to talk to us, to do an interview. But in the end, they didn't. I get it. This whole thing hurt. It sucked. COVID sucked. What it did to us, to our unity, to our trust in institutions and each other, it sucked. And by August 2021, we were sick of it. But COVID wasn't finished with us. Not by a long shot.
It's an exaggeration to say Berlin Wall, but it had those vibes for a little while there.
No one wanted to be the person to stand up and say, well, we're going to remove the alert levels now. It means some people are going to die, but we think that's a trade-off worth making so that people can get their lives back.
Then they can scan your arm with, say, an app on your iPhone, and they can detect the bioluminescence in your veins. That's actually the truth.
This is a joke. Like, what's going on? That's the moment where they really lost a lot of people.
That's next time on Quarantine Nation.
That was episode 6 of Quarantine Nation, an 8-part series produced for Stuff by Te Pūrongo Productions. For more about Quarantine Nation, as well as links to feature articles and extended videos of some of our key interviews, go to www.stuff.co.nz/QN. The series was researched, written, hosted and produced by Adam Dudding and Eugene Bingham of Te Pūrongo Productions, with additional research by Connor Scott. Thanks to Stuff for archival audio, as well as the Department of Information, Sky News Australia, Fox News, ITV and Ocean X. Editing by Toby Longbottom, mixing by Andrew McDowell of Digicate, graphics by Phil Johnson, photography by Abigail Doughty, Chris Skelton and David Unwin. Social media and video editing by Via Digital. At Stuff, thanks to executive producer Chris Reed, content producer Dave Hull and senior legal counsel Charlotte Curry.
Quarantine Nation, oh yeah. Quarantine Nation.
Made with the support of NZ On Air.